Hi and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 71. And today we're going to talk about the first look at the Shadows over Innistrad Remastered data from Draft. But before we go into that, quick word from the sponsors. First of all, mtgazone.com. I write articles there. Some other really good players. I think something Damo da Rosa writes for them as well. J2S Josh is also writing about Limited. Quite good content there. So give it a try. Apart from that, this podcast is sponsored by a very select group of you, as I do have a Patreon. You can probably find the link somewhere on my Twitch. I thought I put it. So yeah, if you are feeling like a generous person, please join the Patreon because there are some perks, including you can have access to the slides and you can have some other perks you will see in a second. Right, with that out of the way, let's move on to the actual topic. Just double checking, laser working, that's very important. Okay, before I go to the main topic, I always start with this sort of preamble, my soapbox moment or whatever you call it. And today's preamble is Magic could use more clarity from the mothership because it honestly is sometimes tiring. To have to decipher things on your own when a simple information would suffice. You will see in a second that there are some discrepancies between the counts of certain commons and rares in this format, and that's obviously nowhere to be read. And those are things that should inform your strategy and draft, especially. Pack collation, pack contents, are there print trends or not? Those things are never really released in the public, or even if they are released in some kind of obscure info bulletins that no one reads and no one knows about. So yeah, I think that especially in packs that are soon to be $1 million lottery tickets, you want to know exactly what is what are the odds of something happening, what is the probability of something, and this information is never provided. I know it would cost a bit of extra work, but I think that a company that can churn out set after set, month after month, and we're living basically now in one big preview of the future sets being released. They could have a standard operating procedure on information that are related to that kind of pack content. And again, especially when we as players are asked to play in tournaments for money, where this pack collation will possibly impact your decisions in the draft. Because obviously, if you know that a certain card is more available than it should be, you might actually adjust your strategy and adjust your bet hedging accordingly with that information. Well, that's enough for the preamble. But I told you that there are those lovely Patreon perks, and one of them is being able to ask the question of the week. And so far, I have one patron that can ask the question of the week, and Mercurio, therefore, is happy to ask a question every single week, and I have to answer it because I'm contractually obliged, and also because Mercurio is a great person, therefore, I would do it anyway. And this week, he asked, how much is best of one versus best of three played? And this is not a straightforward question. I don't have a perfect answer because obviously I can only base it on the 17 lens data, and that might be skewed because maybe more people that are into best of three are playing, are using 17 lens than the players that play best of one. There might be some bias, but I tried the best I can. I calculated the number of games played in best of one in each of those formats and number of games played in best of three in each of those formats, and I calculated the numbers. And you can see it's roughly 25% of the games that are happening in best of three compared to best of one. So best of one is more or less 4 times more games than best of three. It does vary from set to set. For example, sets that were really popular like DMU and Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, they have a slightly lower numbers. Some sets were played quite a lot in best of three. I don't know why exactly the Innistrad sets were not popular among best of one players. Possibly tiredness with a couple of archetypes that were early dominating made people sort of go away for a while. Also, Midnight Hunt was a bit of a shorter format compared to the others. But the general number would be 25%, which roughly relates to the same number of drafts, because the number of games is actually not that different between those two formats. I mean, yes, you will occasionally have a 4-game best of 3 runs, but they don't happen that often for most of the 17 lands users. So yeah, I hope that that answers the Mercurius question. Now to the main topic. We're going to talk about Shadows over Innistrad. And first thing I wanted to start, because that's a very important part of this draft, is the Sir pack composition. And first of all, we have the standard 1 rare and mythic. We have 3 uncommons, 9 commons, and we have 1 card that is from the Shadows of the Past collection. And this collection will be changing weekly, so there's 4 different batches of cards that are going to be released. I think the first week is, well, I know the first week is cards that are somehow related to the tribal. Therefore, you can expect that certain archetypes are going to be slightly stronger or slightly weaker depending on the week. And we're going to address that when we come to the actual card power analysis of this format. But when I was looking at the pack composition, I also looked at something that I do standard. I wanted to look at the pack collation of the format, because you can do that using the basic table from 17 lands. You just calculate how many times was the card seen and what is the ALSA of this card. So ALSA meaning when on average you will see it last. I do it because sometimes there are weird things and it's nice to catch it. Sometimes there are weird things because of the data collation by 17 lands, and I'm checking that for the 17 lands people to help them if I see something weird and they don't know about it. It's always good to keep your hand on the pulse. But predominantly, I'm doing it because very often there are some weird middle rarities included in the format, and I haven't seen that for a couple of sets recently, so that was good. But I did see it now. So, for example, if you see ALSA showing you how often you will see how late you will see the card on average, is a good measure of how many times should you see a card. And as you can see, if you look at the commons here, you have ALSA between 3 and 9. Most of the cards are fitting quite well on this kind of trend line. It's sort of slightly linear for most of the time and then flattens out because of the wheeling becoming slightly unpredictable. But I see 5 cards completely outside of this curve. And for me, this means that these cards have actually a different rarity that is stated on the card. They will have different numbers than any other common. And I looked at those 5 cards, and these are all cards that have 2 sides. And they are allegedly on a different print run in this format. But what it also means is that all those double-sided cards will have roughly 20% less of them in the pod. So it means that if you have a 2-sided card, either something that transforms, a werewolf, or maybe a melt card, instead of seeing the average 2.4 of copies of this card per pod, you will see something more like 1.9 copies per pod. So they become slightly rarer. So you have to keep in mind, if you're looking for that copy of a melt card, it won't be as likely as if it was a normal common. And then I looked at the same graph for the uncommons, and there is absolutely no discrepancies, which means that Wizards synchronized this print run with uncommon rarity, which means that they made sure that uncommons are as uncommon across the board, independent whether they are 2-sided or not. But if you look at the rares, you see this cluster of cards and this one here. They are also on a different trajectory, and it's around 70% more common actually than the rare should be. So instead of average rare, you will see 0.34 copies of each rare per pod. But with these, you will see more like 0. Quick calculation, 0.55, 0.57, that kind of area. And it's the same with mythics. So actually, mythics that are 2-sided, and I think there is one angel that melts with something, are actually as rare as no, it doesn't have anything. So there's a question from J2S Josh. Does it have to do with the packs with two two of the same rare in them. I don't know if there are packs with two of the same rare in them, but there is definitely the second. That there are those special collection cards. They are the same rarity as everything else, so they don't have a problem with like that. It's only two-sided cards because allegedly they're on a separate printer. But for example, there is a mythic angel that has meld with another rare angel, and actually this mythic angel is occurring at the same frequency as a rare. So even though it's a mythic, it happens as frequently as a rare. So you will see it more frequently than you might think. So this is about the pack composition and things that you want to keep in mind. Two-sided rares, you will see them more frequently, which might actually boost some of those strategies because you got some um, really good double-sided cards at higher rarities, and you can bet on seeing them more frequently. I think that there is the Werewolf Lord, for example, that will be, well, almost it will happen like 50%. You have a 50% chance of having it open in your pod as you would have a regular uncommon, which is quite impressive, I have to say. Right, that's about the pack composition. I will start with the color power rankings because it's important to know which colors are solid in this format. And by color power rankings, I'm looking at the win rate of this color in each of its color pairs. I'm only looking at two color decks. This is a predominantly two color format. Also, like 80 something percent of the decks are two color. But first of all, the prevalence of playing by the 17 lens users. It seems that 17 lens users are trying to draft red and green the most. Then somewhere in the middle, you have white and blue, and black is most underdrafted by the 17 lens users. That doesn't mean that this is the case with all the users, because as we saw in one, 17 lens user drafted very differently from the average arena user. But it's important for you to know that the better players that use 17 lens, because that's who they are actually slightly biased towards red and green. White and blue are in the middle, and the black is underdrafted by those players, which maybe tells you something about the power level of those colors as well. Okay. In terms of the win rates of the colors, again, this is a win rate of the color that is weighted by the prevalence of it being played in different combinations. So, for example, if 90% of games with black will be in black-red combination, that would be assigned 90% value, and the other colors would be assigned much lower values, for example. This accounts for the preference of color pairs on top of everything. But the most winning color is white. Then we have red, green, black, and blue. Black and blue roughly even. So this is quite different from which color is most drafted. From this, and I put those graphs side by side. From this, you can see that what 17 lens users maybe underestimate is how powerful white is in this format. They drafted less than it would be advised by the win rate of the cards, actually. So probably white is the most underdrafted color by 17 lens users, judging by the win rate it has. But actually, white, red, and green are quite close in terms of the win rate, and they are sort of tier 1 colors, and blue and black are tier 2 colors with 2 percentage point different, a smaller win rate. Keep in mind, those differences are small, but also because every color is played in 40% of the archetypes, which means that all those numbers contain a lot of overlapping information. So because of that, the differences are not expected to be large. Because they are not expected to be large, 2 percentage point difference is actually quite significant in terms of power of the color. So yeah, also what it seems to me is that maybe blue is slightly overdrafted and maybe black is also slightly underdrafted, even though it's not powerful. And I guess that red and green are drafted approximately at the appropriate level. Probably if people drafted less blue and more white, that would be almost a mirror. Those two graphs would be almost mirroring each other, and that's what you would expect if people were drafting things correctly. Okay. In terms of color per win rate, um, the most winning archetypes are Rakdos and Selesnya at 56.4%. This set actually has a pretty low win rate for the 17 lens users. It's around 53%. Normally, it's closer to 54, 55. Then we have Azorius, slightly lower than that, like 55.8, Gruul 55.2. These are very close. And Izzet 54.7, Orzhov 54.4. And I think that's sort of, if you would say Rakdos, Selesnya, and Azorius being tier 1, then we can say Gruul, Izzet, and Orzhov are tier 2. And then Simic, Boros, and Golgari are uh, one step below that, and Dimir is lagging behind at 48%. So yeah, Simic, Boros, and Golgari something around 53, 52% win rate. This, keep in mind, is still early days, so data is not as abundant as I would want it to be, but it is enough to draw some conclusions out of it. Those archetypes can be plus minus 1 percentage point, for example. So just to give you an impression. In terms of play rate, I think that the 17 lens users are actually good in that aspect. The top 5 archetypes in terms of win rate, I kept the same order here. So Rakdos, Selesnya, Azorius, Gruul, Izzet are the top 5 winning archetypes. They're also the top 5 most played archetypes. Orzhov is underplayed, possibly. It would be interesting to explore some Orzhov builds because it seems it is winning way more than the play rate would suggest. And maybe Dimir is overdrafted, but I don't know why. I've seen it set after set. Dimir always seems to be slightly overdrafted. Possibly because people just like playing Dimir. It appeals to their aesthetics. Because the win rate is honestly really bad. There we go. Jean-Emmanuel de Prasset. Dimir is the best guild. I'm still going for Boros, but that's because it's only because it's my national colors. Okay, and Boros, Golgari are played slightly less. I guess they're played at approximately correct level in terms of looking at the win rate and success rate. Right. So I structured this. First, I will talk about the top commons and uncommons in each color, and then I'm also going to do the same for each of the 5 most popular color pairs. I will not talk about the color pairs that are less popular because the data is just not consistent enough to be talking about them honestly. And then at the end, I'm going to talk a bit about openness of those colors. So in white, the top common is Thraben Inspector. That's 1 mana 1/2 that creates a clue token that you can sacrifice for 2 mana to draw a card at some stage of the game. And yes, at 60.5% game in hand win rate for a 1-drop. I'm looking at this data from Shadows over Innistrad, and honestly, there's been a lot of talk that recently 1-drops have become so good and they were so rubbish before. I'm looking at this set and it's just 1-drops all the way. They're really good 1-drops and lots of them being slightly undervalued actually. Thraben Inspector is not one of those undervalued ones. I think that the card has enough of a pedigree and constructed that people know about its existence and its power. But it's good to see that the data is confirming that Thraben Inspector is the top white common of the set. The contender, so the second highest win rate card, is Apothecary Guys. That's a 4 mana 2/3 flyer, and when it enters the battlefield, if you control a spirit, another spirit, you gain 3 life. Yeah, I mean the gap is quite substantial. There's 3 percentage points between Inspector and Apothecary Geist. There is a significant number of X1s in this format, quite large X1s in the Vampires tribe, for example, which means Thraben Inspector's body is actually quite relevant. And the fact that you draw a card somewhere later in the game, the fact that, for example, white-green aggressive deck has access to extra card draw is so important for those type of decks. Uh, I also pick a hidden gem, and hidden gem is a card that I selected not because it's the third best, although in this case I do think it is the third best common in white. But I mainly selected it because it goes really late. So I selected the cards from like let's say top five that I see are going way later than I would expect a card in top five commons for a color going. Now, obviously, strength of arms, the hidden gem for white, is a combat trick, and combat tricks always go slightly later than anything because most people think I only need one copy of that, so they don't prioritize it, especially in the later packs when they already picked one copy. So that might be the reason, but it's good to know that you have a strong combat trick in a color, and also that this strong combat trick in a color will probably wheel when you open it, so you don't have to prioritize it, and you still can count on getting a good card for your deck later in the draft. That's why I'm actually talking about those hidden gems, uh, to help you maybe think about cards that you don't have to prioritize but you want to have. Um, in terms of uncommons, the top uncommon is also a one drop, Town Gossip Monger. It's a 1/1 for one, but it also has an ability of tapping, plus tapping an untapped creature you control, and then it transforms into a 2/3 that also can pump itself, and there's some other abilities, whatever. But it's basically a one drop that is becoming relevant also in the later game because of the pump ability, because of the 2/3 power toughness. A good play pattern is if you have it in your opening hand, you play it on turn one, you play a 2-drop, end of the turn, you tap it, and the 2-drop that you played, end of the opponent's turn, you tap it and the 2-drop that you played, and you transform it, and then on turn three you have a 2-drop and a card that is basically a 3-drop quality card, able to attack already. So this card has also a very good opening hand win rate, as you would expect. I think in the opening hand, if you have it, it has roughly 64% win rate. And I'm only mentioning it because the other card that is the second most winning white uncommon, Faith Unbroken, a 4-mana aura, enchanted creature you control. When it enters the battlefield, exile target creature and opponent control until this spell leaves the battlefield, and the enchanted creature gets +2/+2. So it basically turns your creature into a bigger version of Brutal Cathar. It has a 60.3 game in hand win rate, but it actually has a whole 10 percentage points lower opening hand win rate than Town Gossip Monger. So basically, these two cards are probably best in opposite strategies of the deck. So Town Gossip Monger really wants explosive starts. Faith Unbroken really will shine in some kind of a more controlling, attrition-y kind of deck. As a hidden gem, I selected Courageous Outrider. It's a 4-mana human scout, a 3/4. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a human card from among them and put it in your hand. Put the rest of the cards on the bottom of library in any order. So I didn't calculate the stats for it, but it probably has a good, like, you want to have probably a good 10 to 12 humans in your deck, and then it will quite frequently draw your card when you play it, because 4 card is actually quite enough to look through. This one has 58% game in hand win rate and has alsa that is significantly higher than the alsa of the other two mentioned card. Actually, no, the Town Gossip Monger is also going pretty late, but of course it's not a hidden gem if it's already a top uncommon. There you go. But Courageous Outrider is definitely going later than some of the much weaker uncommons in white in this set. In terms of blue, the top card is Drag Under with 57.7 game hand win rate, and that is much lower than the Tradewind Inspector, but it's actually at an approximate level of the second best white common, so not bad at all. It's a 3-mana sorcery, return target creature to its owner hand, and you draw a card. So sort of like, what was the card that was doing it on instant? Damn it, wasn't. It wasn't excluded with something else from that same set. But okay, anyway. Sorcery speed is, of course, not perfect for a bounce spell. If you would have it as an instant, probably the win rate would go by 3 percentage points. but it's still solid enough if you are playing a tempo game or if you're playing some kind of spell strategy. So yeah, I mean, clearly a good card in blue, keeping in mind that blue is not the best color in the format. Um, Contender with basically the same win rate. Oh, Repulse, that's the one. Oh, I was thinking Impulse all the time, and it's definitely not Impulse, but it's a Repulse, the instant version of it. Um, so the second one is Take Inventory, 2 mana sorcery, draw a card, and then draw cards equal to the number of cards named Take Inventory in your graveyard. So obviously, if you play the first one, you draw 1 card. If you play the second one, you draw 2 cards. If you play the third one, you draw 3 cards. This is accumulated knowledge and sorcery. Now I remember the old school instant version of it. Again, not as good as sorcery as it would be as an instant, but still good enough, especially in spells matter decks, because it allows you to cast a spell and fuel yourself for more spells, and then you probably want to have multiple copies of that. And the Hidden Gem, a card that has really solid numbers, 57% game and hand win rate, so just a fraction of a percent behind the top two, is Essence Flux, 1 mana instant. Exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner control. If it is a spirit, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Mind that there is a bunch of spirits that have a solid enter the battlefields effect. And they will also grow permanently for 1 mana, so you can use it to counter removal. You can use it before blocks to make your creature bigger, get some kind of other effect. There are some pump effects with spirits. There are some tap effects with spirits, so you can play it as a very versatile, almost toolboxy kind of combat trick. And it has better numbers, and it goes really, really late. You can almost always wheel it. In terms of uncommons in blue, the top card is Nebelgast Herald, 3 mana, flash, 2/1, flying spirit. Whenever it or another spirit enters the battlefield under your control, tap target creature and opponent controls. Obviously, with flash, it can stop a creature from attacking. If you play further spirits after that, you can tap any blockers and push damage through using that kind of strategy. 61.3% is really a really solid uncommon. It's comparable with the top uncommons from any other color. The second most winning card, and again, Navelgast Herald, sort of tempo-y, aggressive card. Number 2, Pour Over the Pages, looks like more of a control-y kind of card, looking for a deck that will play slower game, longer game, and probably win with some unstoppable bomb. Pour Over Pages is a 5-mana sorcery, draw 3 cards, untap up to 2 lands, then discard a card. So obviously you won't play it on turn 3 like you would play with your normal spell that draws 2 cards, that nets you 2 cards, but it offers you higher selection because you draw 3 and then you have to discard 1 card. And furthermore, you can untap 2 lands. Also, you untap before you discard a card. So if you have some kind of a weird blue-black madness or blue-red madness, you can actually use that extra mana to pay the madness cost of the discarded card. Madness, obviously, being if you discard a card, you can play it for a discounted rate most of the time, and also at the speed that normally you wouldn't be allowed. So you can play sorceries at basically instant speed using Madness. This one is, again, 3 percentage points lower than the Navelgast Herald, but 58.3 is solid enough. But I guess you have to pick a particular deck to play it. I think that some sort of blue-red spells would be a good home for it, for example, because that's probably the best blue deck that could use something like Pour Over the Pages, while Navelgast Herald will probably be shining in white-blue kind of spirit synergy decks, which, by the way, all those creature synergy decks are going to be better in the first week than they will be in weeks 2, 3, and 4 because of the special batch of the cards added to the pack. And the Hidden Gem is Compelling Deterrence, 2 mana instant, return target non-land permanent to its owner hand, then that player discards a card if you control a zombie. I don't think you need to control a zombie for this card to be good, but obviously it would help if you do. If you have a zombie, you can use it as a sort of version of a recoil when you can actually kill a permanent if they opponent doesn't have anything in their hand. But again, it's a cheap spell that is a good tempo play, which can be used both in the blue-red aggressive strategies or maybe blue-white spirit strategies. It ticks quite some boxes in those decks. And in blue-black, you will frequently also have a zombie, which means that and the card will become slightly better because of that. In terms of black, the top common is Gissa's Bidding, and that's a 4-mana sorcery. Create 2/2 black zombies tokens. But it also has a madness cost, so if you discard Gissa's Bidding, you can cast the same ability at an instant speed for 2 and a black, so 1 mana less, and also less black intensive because Gissa's Bidding costs 2 black. 57.3, that's weaker than top commons in the other colors, but still a good card. I would guess it's going to be the best in something black-red when you have a lot of enablers for discard, and because of that, you can play it cheaper most of the time. Talking about the discard enablers, Olivia's Dragoon is second most winning black common. It's a 2-mana 2/2, but you can discard a card and it gains flying until end of turn. So obviously the play pattern, we play this on turn 2. On turn 3, give it flying, attack, and the discarded card hopefully has madness. Which brings us to the hidden gem. I swapped them. It's not an accident that Weirded Vampire has a higher win rate than Olivia's Dragoon. Actually, this is the second most winning common in the format so far. But Weirded Vampire has a really high alpha, which means it really goes late and has a really high win rate. So I wanted to put it as a hidden gem to draw your attention to the fact that this card goes quite late. For example, if you are opening a pack that has medium red cards or some kind of removal and the Weirded Vampire, you can sort of bet on the Weirded Vampire wheeling from that pack. But 56.5% win rate, that's close to Gissa's Bidding, actually. And Weirded Vampire, by the way, is a 4-mana 3/3, but it also has Madness, 2 and a black, so you can cast it for 3 mana at instant speed if you want to, if you have something like Olivia's Dragoon. So again, if you don't attack with your Olivia's Dragoon, you leave the mana open, opponent will probably have to think very hard before attacking you because you can always drop something like that at instant speed during their attack phase and block with the 3/3. Okay. Top uncommons. And the top uncommon actually probably should have been the hidden gem of this color, but since it's the highest win rate card, I couldn't really do that. Indulgent Aristocrat, another 1-drop. I would like to stress you, we already like 3 1-drops that were top cards in their colors at given rarities. Indulgent Aristocrat is a 1-mana 1/1 with lifelink, and it has an ability of 2 and sacrificing a creature to put a +1/+1 counter on each vampire you control. Now, this card probably is stronger this week because of this tribal theme in the additional card slot. And also this tribal theme is particularly advancing vampires because I think the best cards in this slot are actually vampire enablers. But still, it's worth noting it. So Bolt the Burp said 1-drop's good news at 11. Partially yes, because the common knowledge before things like maybe Pios Wayfarer or slightly later, the common wisdom among Magic players was that 1-drops were not very good, and I heard it time and time again. And then this paradigm shifted, but only in the last maybe 2.5, 3 years. And I'm looking at this data and I'm thinking maybe those 1-drops were better than we thought all the time. It's just maybe there was not enough data to actually pinpoint to the fact that they were so good. Or maybe Shadows over Innistrad is a particularly 1-drop rich set, or maybe also the the remastering of the set made the one drops better than they were before, because in remastering, WotC did some things that they do to modern sets, and it feels more modern than the traditional one was. But I was slightly surprised just how good those one drops. Okay, Slitherblade was a different story. But maybe it was exactly the same story. Who knows? Contender for the best uncommon in black is Olivia's Bloodsworn, and that's a 2-mana 2/1 flyer vampire soldier. Can't block, but for 1 red, it can give target vampire haste until end of turn. So another vampire enabler. I think that black red is realistically the best home for the vampires. So obviously you will see that the top uncommons and commons in black will be something to do with vampires, because it's their best home. And especially when they're as specific as Indulgent Aristocrat or Olivia's Bloodsworn, when they have strictly vampire synergies, obviously they will be played at a much higher rate in those black-red decks, which are the best black decks, which will mean that they will have the highest win rate. And the hidden gem card that is drafted slightly later than the ones that I mentioned before is called the Bloodline. It's a 2-mana enchantment, 1 mana and discard a card. So again, enabling the madness, which also exists in the same solution space as the vampires, because most of the madness cards are in black and red. So 1 and discard a card, you create a 1/1 black vampire knight creature token with a lifelink. You can only activate it once each turn, but obviously most of the time you will do something like, at the end of your turn, I'll discard this 3/3, pay 3 mana, make a 3/3. Also, I'll make a 1/1 with lifelink at the same time. It has a slightly lower win rate, 55.2, but it's still decent, and I've seen it in action today, and it was brilliant. I saw Corticals playing it, and it looked pretty fantastic when you have, other discard enablers and vampire synergies, and also madness creatures. Come on, deck. Come on, slides. Okay, there we go. In terms of red, top common is Galvanic Bombardment at 59.2. 1 mana instant. It deals X damage to target creature, where X is 2 plus the number of cards named Galvanic Bombardment in your graveyard. So for 1 mana, the first copy will kill a X2, the second copy will kill an X3, the third copy will kill an X4, and so on. I mean, if you're lucky enough to have multiple copies of it. But again, this is a great card for the blue-red spells deck. In multiple copies, it is a spell. It makes you live longer and allows you to win because of the synergies with spellcasting. Yes, it is best of 1 stats. It is only best of 1 stats. I just don't have time to do both of them, and I think also best of 3 stats, you just don't have enough numbers right now to draw any conclusions. I wouldn't be able to make half of those analyses for best of 3 as of yet. Maybe when we will see it at the end, although this format will be really particularly difficult to analyze because of the mix-up of one slot in the pack changing every week. It's going to be maybe interesting to look at it at the end of the format. And this is why I hate my job. At the end of the format, when no one will care about it, I can make a great episode comparing those the impact of those of the 1 extra card in each pack. That will be my that's my life basically. Data analysis is always 2 weeks behind punditry, and that's the problem with the creating content that relies on data. So JPSN54 says, I'll go first through the second best card, Incendiary Flow. 2 mana sorcery, deals 3 damage to any target. If a creature dealt damage this way would die this turn, exile it instead. 58.8. So Galvanic Bombardment and Incendiary Flow are basically on par in terms of the win rate. And JPSN54 says, I barely see any Incendiary Flows, but so many bombardments. And there is something to it. I will help myself to the 17 lens if it collaborates with me. to the 17 lens statistics, I look at the rarity, common, and color red. Galvanic Bombardment goes one pick later. This will mean that you will see more copies of it per draft. And Incendiary Flow is, I think, the highest picked common of all the commons in this format. That's probably why you don't see that many of them in your draft. Okay, we can close this one. Come on. Go back to the thing. Hidden Gem. There is no really like super good hidden gem in red. I picked Make Mischief. It has a much lower win rate of 54.6, but it goes really late, and it's a 3 mana, deal 1 damage to any target, create a 1/1 red devil creature token that has, when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. I think that slightly upgraded version of this card in Midnight Hunt was Neonate Rush. The deal one damage to something and 1 damage to target player and draw a card. But this one still looks pretty good. Can ping an X1, and then the red devils that die with a ping are, if you played against them or with them, you know how annoying or how fantastic they can be. So not a bad card at all, and goes very late. And again, it's a way of making a creature while casting non-creature spells, which will be useful for some cards in this format at least. In terms of uncommons, the top uncommon of the format in terms of win rate is Uncaged Fury. That's a 3 mana instant. Target creature gets +1/+1 and gains double strike until end of turn. This is really solid combat trick. Can win games out of nowhere, but also can win combats very efficiently. Even though it costs 3 mana, I think that the effect is really strong, especially with that ability of winning games out of nowhere, which is quite important, or speeding up the game by 2 turns by, playing it on your 3 power flyer, for example, and hitting opponent for 8 out of nowhere. Number 2 on that list is Fire Temper. Uncaged Fury had a 59.3 game in hand win rate, Fire Temper 59.2. So the whole 0.1 percentage point difference, which means that they are basically on par with each other. And probably over the next week, we'll see Fire Temper rise to the top. Fire Temper being 3 mana instant, it deals 3 damage to any target, but it has Madness cost of 1. So if you have those discard enablers, you can basically play a Lightning Bolt while getting some other effect from the discarding. And the Hidden Gem is another 1-drop. Village Messenger, it's a 1 mana 1/1 with haste. At the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast the last turn, transform it, and it transforms into a 2/2. So if you play it on turn 1, you attack for 1. If the opponent doesn't have a 1-drop, then next turn you attack for 2 again. So it already does 3 damage, which for me is the good 1-drop will deal 3 to 4 damage, and that's exactly what you want from your good 1-drop. And then later in the game, it will still be some sort of a relevant body. The win rate is 56.9%, which is really solid. And that's, I think, 4th 1-drop that we have on that list. I'm pretty sure we had more 1-drops than 4-drops so far in our collection. Right. In terms of green, the top common is Moonlight Hunt. That's a 2 mana instant. Choose target creature you don't control. Each creature you control that's a wolf or a werewolf deals damage equal to its power to that creature. And this card is heavily biased because it's basically a multicolor card. It says green on it, but it's basically a red-green card. It's played, I think, 80 or 90% of the time in a red-green decks. Because of that, it's a high synergistic card and it has a high win rate, 58.8% in this case. So yeah, that's it. It's a solid removal. If you have a couple of werewolves, it can kill almost anything. Number 2 green common is Hinterland Logger. That's a 2 mana werewolf. and it transforms into a 4/2 Trampler, if I'm not mistaken. Um, but yeah, keep in mind that this is the second best common in green, but actually it is 20% less common than other commons because it's a two-sided card. So that's one of those cards that that you will see slightly less in your packs because it's in a separate slot in the booster pack. The hidden gem I selected is Interpret Provisioner. It's a 4-mana human scout, 3/3 with trample. When it enters the battlefield, another target human you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Now, this will work well with the front side of the werewolves, which are always human. And also in white-green decks, you have plenty of humans to target it. The card looks solid in their numbers. I also again watched Korok's streaming, and he was quite positive about the power level of that card, and probably said that it's better than he remembers it being in the original run, which maybe means that it aligns better with the remastered character of this set. In terms of uncommons, Duskwatch Recruiter is an absolute top uncommon for green. 2 mana human warrior werewolf, 2/2. For 3 mana, you can look at top 3 cards of your library and reveal a creature card from among them and put them in your hand. And it transforms into a 3/3 that makes all your creatures cheaper by 1 colorless. And it's a 3/3. So a really strong card, sheer power. Again, another card that in any kind of green deck, it allows you to draw cards later in the game, and that kind of mana sink for drawing cards is very crucial for those decks because they will often run out of steam, and this card makes sure that they will never run out of steam. Contender, and a very close one to be fair. Duskwatch Recruiter had a 61.4% win rate. Clearshot is 60.3% win rate, so just 1% percentage point difference. Clearshot, you should remember because it was recently reprinted, but it's a 3-mana instant. Target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. This card can be 2-for-1 most of the time. Can be also a 3-for-1. So I've very good pattern with it is there is a combat, you block or you attack, whatever. Opponent plays a combat trick on some other creature that's on a creature. You use Clear Shot to pump after blocks one of your creatures that makes it survive the combat, and you use Clear Shot to kill the target of the combat trick, and all of a sudden they lost combat trick, a creature, and another creature, and the game is basically over. So Clear Shot can do tremendous amount of things. We were just discussing if this is one of the best limited removal spells of all times, and it's not far, I can tell you. Still Zenith Flare though. In terms of hidden gem, Graph Mole, 3-mana mole beast, a 2/4, and whenever you sacrifice a clue, you gain 3 life. That's a defensive creature that you probably want to play in one of those slower decks. Maybe something like a green-blue thing based on investigating would be great because it also gains you life. And a 2/4 body seems like pretty well positioned in this format, as there are many 2/2s and 3/3s. And Grafmole has 57.2% game and hand win rate. Right. So we went through all the cards, but what I didn't mention is the cards from the Shadows from the Past. As I said, they're going to be shifting weekly, and this week, the first week of the format, the theme is Tribal. And there are 15 of those cards, 18 of those cards. There are 18 of those cards in total. 5 of them are common, but actually only 2 of them are solid. Vampiric Fury, that actually is pretty good and almost always wheels. It's a 2-mana instant. Vampire creatures you control get +2/+0 and first strike until end of turn. This card has a high win rate. Obviously, you will only play it in the Vampire deck, but you should know that this card will most likely wheel. And also, if you pick a vampire early, you can send it around the table to see if there is another vampire player on the pod, because they will probably pick it if they are there, and if they are not there, it will come back to you. It has a very, very high alsa, so it probably wheels like 70% of the time. Another good card from the common slot of that Shadows from the Past is Battleground Geist. This one has a lower win rate, but 55 is still decent enough. It's a 3/3 flyer for 5, and other spirit creatures you control get +1/+0. Which is particularly important, as most of your other spirit creatures will be small flyers, which means that they basically double or increase by 50% in their power, which is quite a good boost, especially when you have evasion tagged onto them. Um, Other commons are not as powerful, I would say. And I did some rudimentary calculations based on the numbers, and I think that out of 10 packs you open, you will get probably 6 of the common Shadows from the Past cards, and in the remaining 4, you get uncommons and rares and mythics. Okay. However, there are really strong uncommons in this Shadow of the from the Past slot. The best two by quite a lot in this iteration are Droxcall Captain and Stormcirk Captain. Oh, thanks, Jamie, for the raid. I just noticed in the chat that I've been raided by Jamie Topples. So now I'm officially uber rated, and probably overrated as well. So, hi, Jamie. So Droxcall Captain is the Spirit Lord, 3 mana, 1 white, blue, for a 2/2 flyer. Other spirits you control get +1/+1 and have hexproof. Forbid that you play 2 of those, as you did in Constructed when you played Banned Spirits or Azorius Spirits. Really strong card. Obviously, makes all your spirits bigger, makes them hard to deal with. They have to kill this thing first before they can start doing anything to your other creatures. Really high win rate, way above 60%. And not that far behind it is Stormcare Captain. That's a similar cost, but in Rakdos, so 1 black red. It's a 2 to first strike vampire, but other vampires you control get +1/+1 and have first strike. And especially with a bunch of 4/1, 5/3 vampires in this format, it can become really oppressive to raise this card if you don't have a way of killing it. And to a much lesser extent, there is Immerwolf. Again, 1 red green 2/2 with Intimidate. It can be blocked except by artifact creature and creatures that share a color with it. So against some color combinations, it's going to be a 3 mana 2/2 unblockable, and it pumps all the other wolf and werewolf creatures you control. And also, it has another ability: non-human werewolves you control can't transform, which means that your backsides of the werewolves will stay the backsides of the werewolves, even if someone plays 2 spells. So usually actually always the backside is more powerful than the front side. So yeah, Immerwolf. This one has a lower win rate than either Droxel Captain or Stormcrack Captain, but still is relatively decent. Okay. Oh yeah, I've seen in chat Mercury and J-Rock say that it has some non-bow potential, the Immerwolf, so we have to be careful about those because some things cannot flip to the backside because of it. So this ends the part where I talk about color power, and now let's go more specifically into what makes the particular archetype tick. And you will see some of the cards that we've seen in the first part, but there are some cards that are very specific for the archetype. And I'm only going to look at the top 5 most played archetypes because the other ones just don't have enough data to get some kind of a useful conclusion out of it. So top 5 most played archetypes are Selesnya, Rakdos, Gruul, Azorius, and Izzet. And I'm going to do them in reverse order, starting with Izzet. So in blue-red, here I have a slightly different structure. I have a top card. I have Archetype Star, and by that I mean a card that has a higher win rate in this particular archetype than on average, and a Hidden Gem, which is a card that goes really late and has a high win rate in that archetype. So similar, but instead of number 2, I have Archetype Star, which is very archetype specific. So top card is Galvanic Bombardment, but actually, if I recall correctly, it's exactly on par with the other 3 damage removal. Memory. Incendiary Flow. 61.4% game and hand win rate. Galvanic Bombardment, again, the shock that grows when you have more copies of it in the graveyard. The Archetype Star, the card really performs very well compared to other archetypes it was put in, is Take Inventory. The draw a card that grows with the copies in the graveyard. So both of those cards are really like foundations of the blue-red spells. The Hidden Gem is Tormenting Voice. It has a really good win rate. This card has mixed record in terms of win rate in different formats. It's been pretty strong in some, less strong in the others, or this type of card in general. But here, what makes it maybe push across the finish line is the existence of Madness in red, which means that you can cast it for 2, discard a card as an additional cost, and cast it for the Madness cost, and then you still draw 2 cards, which means that you basically net 2 cards for 2 mana, which is great. And also is a spell which will help with some spell synergies. And it has a high win rate, 58.2% in this archetype, and it goes really late, so you always have access to it. You can probably have any number of copies of that. And then if you can stack up on Madness spells and payoffs for playing spells, you're pretty much in the good. But looking at this list, first of all, in the Spells Matters archetype in this format, spells are much more important than the creature payoffs for them, for example. Since I am in the 17, that's another tab, I can actually speculate about it a bit. Game and win rate. So if you look at the classic creatures that you might expect being good in the Spells Matter archetype, you have to go pretty low into the cards to find something. There is Ingenious Scab, that's a 3 mana prowess that for a blue can get +1/-1 until end of turn. That has a 57% win rate. There's Thing in the Eyes with 57% win rate. It's the spells that really, really are important for this archetype. For example, Thermo Alchemist, the 2 mana 0/3 defender that can tap to deal 1 damage, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you untap it. That has like 56% win rate, for example. And Mercurial Geists, the 4 mana 1/3 flyer that gets +3/+0 every time you cast an instant or sorcery, that's around 55% win rate. So yeah, if you play this archetype, it seems that getting those spells is way more important than getting the creatures. And I think it's also like there will be more competition for getting the spells than for getting the creatures. So you might actually want to try to wield the creatures and try to draft the spells. So, for example, Mercurial Geists have Alsa of 6, which means they will wheel around 50% of the time. But okay. In terms of uncommons, top uncommon is Fiery Temper, 61.9% win rate. The Archetype Star, the card that really does poorly on average, but is really good in this archetype, is Shreds of Sanity. 3 mana sorcery. Return up to 1 target instant card and up to 1 target sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand, and then discard a card, exile Shreds of Sanity. So you can imagine that maybe turn 3 you Fiery Temper something, turn 4 you play Shreds of Sanity, return Fiery Temper and maybe some other sorcery to your hand, discard Fiery Temper, and cast it instantly for your madness cost, and you do a lot of cardboard shuffling through that, and a lot of creatures going to die because of that kind of play pattern. Um, and then hidden gem with really high alsa is pieces of the puzzle, 3 mana sorcery in blue. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library. Put up to 2 instant or sorcery cards from among them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. Build the burp. I think that probably the blue red decks want to win with the 6 mana. What's it called? There is the 6 mana sorcery. Is it? Rise from the Tides. Yeah, that's the one. I actually don't know exactly what is the win rate of this. Is it common or uncommon? Rise from the Tides. Yeah, it has a 59% win rate. It's uncommon. Rise from the Tide is a 6 mana sorcery, and it creates tap 2/2 black zombie creature token for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. Yeah, that's like a perfect game ending kind of thing. You spin the wheels a bit for the first some turns, then you play Rise from the Tides, and you kill through that. And Pieces of the Puzzle is exactly the card that will allow you to do that kind of thing. Uh, it's also important that you can pick up 2 instant or sorceries and put the rest to your graveyard. So, for example, you can put a Take Inventory to your graveyard so that the first one goes there without you having to cast, and then every other copy becomes draw 2 for 2. Um, yeah, that covers the blue red, I guess. In terms of white blue, top common, hi, surprisingly, is Thraben Inspector. I think in every white combination, Thraben Inspector comes out on top. 60-point end game in hand win rate. Even though it doesn't have any spirit synergies, it's just a good card. It's just enough on the rate. The 1/2 body is actually important, and yeah, you should just pick it anytime you see it. What I classified as an archetype star is Guardian of Pilgrims. It's a 2 mana 2/2 spirit cleric, and when it enters the battlefield, target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Um, Again, solid body. Later in the game, it can pump up a flyer that can go through extra damage. It is actually good with the combat trick that we're talking in blue, where you basically can blink the Guardian of Pilgrims. It comes back as a 3/3. It pumps something else, and your blocks look completely different all of a sudden, especially on the defense. But also, like on the offense, you can just play it later in the game and make a 2/1 flyer into a 3/2, and finish the game slightly earlier. While the body behind will probably trade with something. Um, And the hidden gem I selected is Spontaneous Mutation. Because blue white usually plays the sort of we pass each other in the night kind of ships passing each other in the night kind of game. When you attack in the skies and your opponent is attacking on the ground. The problem with that kind of strategy normally is that ground creatures are cheaper because they don't have flying. Therefore, they're not cheaper but bigger for the same mana because they don't have flying. So it's important to have cards that will sort of shift the race into your favor. And Spontaneous Mutation seems to be a very efficient card to do so. It's a 1 mana flash aura, enchanted creature. Enchanted creature gets -X/-O, where an X is the number of cards in your graveyard. Uh, and even with 2 cards in your graveyard, it's going to be enough to make sure that the racing becomes much easier for you. And the card has a 57% game in hand win rate, which is solid, and goes really, really late. So probably wouldn't stack on too many copies of those, but some copies are okay. In terms of uncommons, we basically, I mean, there's basically 2 uncommons in blue white that are just insanely good for uncommon level card. Nabelgast Herald, we talked about it before. 64.7% game and hand win rate, which is just incredible. And obviously, this is helped by the fact that you have spirits a lot in that archetype. So it will do multiple things at the same time. Again, as I said, because it has flash, you play it on your opponent's turn before attack, tap something, and that helps you swing the race. And then later, if you're playing a mirror or if they have creatures with reach or flyers, you can also tap them to enable yourself attacks by playing other spirits. And then Droxcal Captain, which is not far behind Navelgast Herald, which is again insane, with 63.5% game and hand win rate. The Spirit Lord that gives them also +1/+1 and hexproof. Um, what I selected as a hidden gem is Spectral Shepherd, a 3 mana 2/2 with flying. Uh, and it has an ability for 1 and a blue to return target spirit you control to its owner's hand. Again, you can make a combo of Naval Gust Herald with it by basically making a 5 mana tapper. You can save your creatures from dying. You can do multiple things. And also, what is important, only a spirits player will probably want that. Therefore, it goes late in the draft and has a 57.8 game and hand win rate, which is obviously 7 percentage points behind Naval Gust Herald. But Naval Gust Herald doesn't go that late, so there's that. Okay, red green. In terms of commons, top common is Incendiary Flow, the 2 mana deal 3 and exile at 60.5. It's still a very efficient removal, and you can see that. But the archetype star really is Moonlight Hunt, the card that is custom built to give an additional removal to the werewolf deck. It sort of reminds me, weirdly, I know, but it sort of reminds me of the Silver Bolt from Midnight Hunt, but it's the opposite. Well, Silver Bolt was the thing that was killing the werewolf decks in Midnight Hunt. Moonlight Hunt in Shadows of Innistrad Remastered is doing the opposite. It gives werewolf decks the weapon that other decks don't have, and therefore it gives them a really, really strong common that goes really late. Yes, Bolt the Bird. Someone said Bolt. The hidden gem, a bit low quality hidden gem, but it's there and it's better than in any other color combination that I checked. Is Conduit of Storms, 3 mana, 2/3 werewolf. Whenever it attacks, add 1 red at the beginning of your next main phase this turn. So sort of weird mana dork that has to attack to do that. And you can transform it for 5 mana into a Eldrazi thing that gives you 2 mana every turn. That is quite big as well. And this card is not great in any other deck, but in werewolf deck it actually seems to be decent because of maybe a couple of werewolf synergies and because maybe you want to have that extra mana because you have big stuff, big chunkers to cast. Yes, if it attacks and gets killed, you still have the mana. Okay, uncommons. Uncommons. Again, Duskwatch Recruiter is the top uncommon in this format. Mine, its win rate is barely higher than Incendiary Flow, showing how good Incendiary Flow is. 60.8% game and win rate. As I said, this is the werewolf that allows you to draw cards on the front side and makes creature spells cheaper on the back side. And as we learned, this deck probably wants some extra mana and actually doesn't mind having it. The Archetype Star, a card that is specifically good in this archetype, is Gaia Reach Bandit. It's a 3 mana 3/2 with haste. At the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast last turn, you transform it, and it transformed into a 4/3 that does something to that does something to werewolves. Where it is? Where is it? God, I love my leaky memory of cards. Um, Oh yeah, it turns the 4/3 that automatically transforms the werewolves when they enter the battlefield, which is quite solid when you have multiple werewolves. I knew that I had to memorize this card better. I did memorize the hidden gem. So Gaia Reach Bandit has a 58.9% game in hand win rate, which is really solid, and it actually has a very low win rate in other archetypes. So if you're playing your werewolves, you should be able to get this card. Bye, Mad Moses. Hidden gem in this archetype is Neglected Heirloom. It's a 1 mana equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1. But when equipped creature transforms, you transform Neglected Heirloom, and Neglected Heirloom transforms into a an equipment that gives +3/+3 and first strike instead of +1/+1. So a very upgraded version of Short Sword. And it has solid 58% win rate. Yeah, again, goes quite late, so you will be able to get copies of that if they are open on the table. And if you are the werewolf player, you're going to get the most out of the ability to transform because your cards have a much higher chance to transform. Okay, white green. Top card, Thraben Inspector, surprise, surprise, in terms of commons. We talked about the card enough, I think. The Archetype Star, and I picked it because it is quite an interesting thing and maybe not obvious, is Haunted Fengraf. It has a 58.6% game in hand win, right? I know. I was surprised myself, but it has a 58.6% game in hand win rate. It's a land that adds 1 to your mana pool, but you can sacrifice it to return a creature or card at random from your graveyard to the hand. It has solid numbers. Uh, Even sample size was not bad at all, and it was a surprise to me. So I put it on that particular list because I thought that this is something maybe people don't expect. But where is it? Come on, sorry. Yes, it's the sixth most winning common in white green decks. Again, small sample size, but maybe there is something to it, and I'd rather draw your attention to it while I can. Because I could have talked about strength of the arms, but we talked about it already when we looked at the top white commons. I think that those decks very often will not need multiple lands, and converting your land into a card is actually not a terrible thing. And if you don't have like some incredible color requirements by having lots of two-pipped cards and one drops in both colors, I think it might just do what you need to do. Oh yeah, I still put Strength of Arms as a hidden gem. Yeah, this card is just going very, very late. Also, yeah, I mentioned Haunted Fengraft. I checked, and in other archetypes, it was not good at all. But in this one, it was. So yeah, that's why I selected it here. Strength in Arms, the 1 mana combat trick, gives +2/+2 until end of turn, and if you control an equipment, create a 1/1 human soldier creature token. Is still good, 59.1% game in hand win rate. Right. In terms of uncommons, still Desperate Recruiter, a card that is as good in this archetype, actually better than in the actual dedicated werewolf one, 63.4, but that may be because white green is generally better. The star of the archetype that I selected is Veteran Cathar, 2 mana 2/2, and has an ability 3 and a white, target human gains double strike until end of turn. So like a really good 2-drop that has an ability that makes it relevant in the later game, and also might be a lightning rod for removal rather than maybe your bigger creatures later in the game, which might allow you to win the game. The hidden gem, or not so hidden gem, is Griff's Boon, a 1 mana aura. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has flying. And also for 3 and a white, you can return it from the graveyard to the battlefield, attached to target creature, activate only as a sorcery. And this card goes slightly later than other things. and has 61% win rate, which is great. And this is something of a general observation. White green is really, really strong on the uncommon level. I think that there's like 6 or 7 uncommons that have over 60% win rate. And that's way more than any other color combination that we have in this format. So that's worth knowing, I think, that if you want to draft white green, you need to make sure that you get those essential uncommons. Even though commons are not bad, if you can see common number 6 in the Hunt and Fen graph already has around 59% win rate as well. Okay, black red. That's the most played archetype by the 17 lens users. Possibly because there are pods where it's atrociously open, and experienced 17 lens users will pounce on that kind of opportunity. But it's not an archetype that is generally open, as we will see in a second. The top common is Gissa's Bidding. We talked about the card. Create 2 zombies, has madness, really strong, even though it's not a vampire synergy. I think that's probably like the predominant non-vampire creature spell in this archetype, I think. Archetype star is Olivia's Dragoon at 58% game in hand win rate. This is the prime enabler for the madness spells, so it's probably very, very important to pick multiple copies of this, as it doesn't cost you any mana to discard the card, and actually it can gain the benefit of getting flying and dealing extra damage, which is important because this is a strictly single plan deck. I want to get as much damage as possible. And the hidden gem of the archetype, card that will wheel almost always if you open it, Vampiric Fury, the +2/+2/+2/+0 first strike to all the vampires for 2 mana, which again I've seen doing things today that shouldn't be legal probably. That one has 57% win rate. That's really, really strong for a card that you almost have a guarantee of wheeling. In terms of uncommons, the top uncommon is Fiery Temper. We talked about the card, the Madness deal 3 instant. At 61.5% game and hand win rate, and a whisker behind it, Stormcreep Captain, the Vampire Lord at 61.4, and another whisker behind it, the hidden gem of the archetype, Indulgent Aristocrat, goes pretty late, a 1/1 lifelinker. You can sacrifice a creature, put a +1/+1 counter on each vampire you control, and there's ways of doing that that are really, really, you feel like you're doing something wrong when you use the ability and you just pump 5 other vampires and they all of a sudden have first strike, and then they get +2/+0. It just very quickly turns into a game that not even a bomb can win. Yes, that's an important comment from Chronic 33. Take advantage of the Stormcreep Captain because next week you won't have it. And I'm really wondering how it's going to impact the power of the black-red deck, especially that also the Vampiric Fury is going. So 2 quite important spells for that archetype are going to be gone next week. And we'll see how what it means for the viability of it. And I think that both of them are going to be quite essential. And I think that black red is going to take a hit. So if you want to play vampires, I would suggest to hurry up with it. Okay, so last data slide of the presentation. Every time there is a new set, I measure a thing called openness. But because today I have like a bunch of people that never saw my seminar, I'm going to quickly describe what openness is. What I basically do is I look at the cards that have a win rate of over 56% game in hand win rate, and I calculate how many of those cards on average you will see in a draft. And this gives you the sort of an idea of what can you expect, what kind of quality deck you can expect. If every single card in your deck is going to be over 56%, it's going to be probably pretty solid and the deck that you want to have 5 wins or more with. And how you do it, I basically know how many copies of each card are open. Because of 17 lens data, I know how late those cards are going because I know the ALSA number. And using the ALSA number and rarity statistics, I can sort of calculate how many of those cards are going to go through. And because I know the win rates of those cards, I can also um, sort of see which cards I'm going to take into the analysis, into the account. Now, this is a very early days of the format, so I use the data for archetype win rates to calculate it. So not all the cards have a sufficient sample size to know what the win rate will be. That's why those numbers are slightly lower than you might be used to if you are watching this stream for longer. But still, it gives you a good impression of which color is the most open by default. Um, Meaning that if you would sit at the draft table looking at this data, if you pick white green early and you open like a good white card, you see some green cards, you have really good chance that you're going to get enough really good playables to make a solid deck. If you do the same with red green, you don't have that kind of guarantee. So yeah, white and green cards are going to be much more available, and this, to understand why, we would have to go all the way back, all the way back to uh, to the first slides, where you can see that white is drafted much less than red and green are. And still white is the strongest color, which means that a lot of white good cards are going to be going late. And of course, those cards are particularly going to shine in white green archetype. So the win rates for white green are going to be higher, which means more cards are in the category that I accept as a good card. So over 56% win rate. But generally, when you look at it, you have white green, that is the most open color pair. Then you have white blue, blue red, and black red, which are sort of close to each other, is a tier two most open colors from those top five. And then you have red green, which is not as open, but does have some key cards that are available, and maybe can actually make a better use of those cards with slightly lower win rates, because it's so dependent on synergy, not only on pure card power. Oh, my voice is going. I'm still just recovering from a cold, so I'm sorry for that if I'm making too many pauses. But yeah, I'm just worried about my throat. Um, Obviously, I would love to give you the openness results for the other colors, but unfortunately, the data sample sizes are not big enough for doing that reliably, and I don't want to use the data to misinform rather than to inform, and that would be the case possibly if I did it with the other five colors. Hopefully, I can do it next week and expand it for those five less drafted archetypes, and maybe speculate about what makes them tick, because the number sizes will increase obviously over the week, especially as people will frantically start preparing for the Arena Open, talking about openness. Um, but I guess that this is more or less it in terms of the seminar for today. As always, I would like to thank 17 Lands team for tirelessly working to give me the data so I can blab for hours. Viral Misnomer, Hululu, Grant Wu, and increasingly frustrated Ale Ballini, who has to really struggle with deciphering the logs and what's he changing things at random. I would like to thank my sponsor, mtgazone.com. Check my articles there. There is a really interesting one, I think, about sideboarding and draft, and how information is important in sideboarding decisions, and how 17 Lens users are good in that. Oh yeah, J2S Josh is also writing there. So yeah, if once you're there, you might as well check his. I would like to thank my patrons. Obviously, I will now list my patrons that are new this week. I would also like to thank Jake Brown for helping me to release this in the podcast version, and dedicating his time to helping technologically disabled person to run a podcast. And as we are on the topic of the podcast, SSku and Mana Junkie are the people that made the music that I'm using for my intro. And with that, I'll see you next week.